The First Minister opposed testing of students until there were big outbreaks in universities. She criticised the use of lateral flow tests in Liverpool, claiming they were politically motivated. Then, well after the start of the second wave, she changed her mind. She refused to implement airport testing until months after holidaymakers brought the virus back from abroad. And now she's got the capacity of the PCR tests, but refuses to use most of them. On testing, why does this government always shut the stable door after the horse has bolted?
First Minister.
Sometimes when Willie Rennie's scripting these questions, if it never crosses his mind, what is my possible motivation for just opposing all these things, that if I really thought they could help us beat this virus and save lives, why on earth would I oppose them? Actually, what we do in the Scottish Government, we don't always get it right. I'd be the last to say we do. We make mistakes. We have made mistakes in the course of this. We've tried to learn as we go. But we try to understand the technology, the use of the technology, the pros and cons, and make informed decisions. And why today of all days do I think it is important on testing to make that point is that, you know, south of the border, not that long ago, before Christmas, there was a big announcement made about the rollout of lateral flow testing in schools to every pupil daily. Lateral flow testing. It's been paused today because it is not practical and it is not sensible to do it in that way. So we try to make sure that we get these things as right as we possibly can. The lateral flow technology, we haven't had lateral flow tests in volumes or indeed at all until relatively recently in the pandemic. And there is still mixed opinion, which is part of the reason the MHRA hasn't given the go-ahead to what was wanted in England in schools about just where and how effective they are to use. I think they are an addition to what we've done through PCR, but we need to continue to consider these things really, really carefully. And, you know, the last point I'd make about this, and I hope people would agree, I'm one of the last people that ever stands here and is complacent in any way about the challenge we face right now. We are in a precarious, difficult position. People are living under horrendous restrictions. So the situation in Scotland is not good. But if we are doing everything as wrong as Willie Rennie keeps trying to suggest, then why is it that, albeit we're in a very difficult position, actually case rates have been almost throughout this pandemic and remain so much lower than they are in the other UK nations and in many other parts of Europe. So we've got lots still to do, lots still to learn. Of course we make mistakes, but sometimes maybe people want to reflect on the fact we don't always get everything wrong.
Willie Rennie.
God forbid that we ever ask questions of this First Minister when we think she gets it wrong. I mean, the reason why I question her is because the evidence is clear that the First Minister is always behind the curve on the testing. I just read out the list of reasons that she initially opposed and then she supported it only weeks later, but only after there were big outbreaks. And that's when we needed the tests, before the outbreaks. Last week, for example, I proposed deploying that PCR testing capacity at supermarkets, Royal Mail sorting offices and police stations should be rolled out. The front line. Once again, the First Minister said no. As a result, 50,000 tests go unused every single day. Now, since Christmas, the SNP government have failed to use nearly 1 million of those gold standard PCR tests. That's the phrase they use, gold standard. Now, to be precise, that's 908,585 potential tests wasted. First Minister says she is saving them for a rainy day. Well, First Minister, it's bucketing down outside if she hasn't noticed. We have no idea when schools are going to reopen. Operations in hospitals are being cancelled. Businesses are on their knees and we have been told not to leave our homes. So how bad does it have to get before we get this SNP government to use those tests to detect the virus hiding in our communities?
First Minister.
Can we clear one thing up at the outset, Presiding Officer? Just because I disagree with Willie Rennie, just because I think he's downright wrong and doesn't necessarily always understand the issues that he's asking me about, just because I take issue with the fact that he puts words in my mouth that I've never ever used, does not mean I don't like or accept getting asked questions. I've probably answered more questions in the course of this pandemic than any leader anywhere else in the world. And along the way, I've probably admitted to more mistakes, not necessarily because we've made more mistakes, but because we've been upfront in conceding that we've made mistakes. So, Willie Rennie has to recognise that if he wants to, as he is absolutely right to do, ask these questions, sometimes if I don't think he's getting it right, I've got a right to say so as well. Now, on the issues, Willie Rennie says we've failed to use all of these PCR tests. These are PCR tests that are there for symptomatic people to get tested when they have symptoms. If you have symptoms, self-isolate and get tested. If we used all of these symptomatic tests, we'd have a prevalence and incident rate right now that was multiple times higher than it is, and that would not be a good thing. That would be a really, really bad thing and a terrible position to be in. And on the more widespread use of testing, we evaluate, we take advice, we look at where we can use testing strategically and tactically. And I don't know, maybe Willie Rennie would have preferred us to stand up before Christmas and say we're going to test every pupil in every school every day, and then have to stand here right now and say, actually, we can't do that because we got that wrong. We've decided to do it in a different way so that when we do launch these testing programmes, we try to get them right and we make sure they contribute overall to having case levels lower than in many other countries, and hopefully over the next weeks getting case rates coming down firmly again.